Welcome everybody who's present and anyone who's looking in via the webcast to this morning's October meeting of the London Assembly Economy Committee. Can I just start by saying that what the topic for this morning's main discussion is going to be about is the Mayor's economic policies for Londoners. If you want to participate in the discussion on social media, we've got hashtags of hashtag Assembly Economy, hashtag London Business and hashtag economic policy. Now we've got a few short items of formal business as usual to go through. Before we get to that main item, can I just remind anybody who's present to turn your electronic devices to silent mode. And first of all, can I start by finding out if there are any apologies this morning?
Yes, Chair. Apologies been received from Assembly Member Twycross, for whom Assembly Member McCartney is substituting.
Thank you very much. And can I also draw your attention to the next item of business, which is the declaration of interest. Could I ask all the members present to note the list of appointments as set out at item 2 on pages 1 to 4, and can I see if anyone has got any further interest to declare? No, okay, that's noted. The minutes of the previous meeting held on the 10th of September are found on pages 5 to 46. Can we agree them as a correct record of the previous meeting?
Agreed.
Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, I probably should just declare actually the time the Living Wage Commissioner for London.
In relation to the previous set of...
No, we have questions on the living wage today.
Ah, okay, so you're one of the living wage commissioners. Right, so we do need to just add an additional declaration for Assembly Member McCartney. The next item on the agenda is the summary list of actions, which is to be found on pages 47 to 72. Can we note the completed actions, please?
Noted.
And can we also note the outstanding actions as well?
Noted.
The next item, of course, brings us back to the one that I mentioned at the beginning, which is, are the Mayor's economic policies delivering for Londoners? And I'm pleased to say that we are joined this morning by some guests who I hope are going to be able to help us answer that question. The Mayor had much in his 2016 manifesto about economic policies and described himself as intending to be the most pro-business mayor ever. So I think we're hoping to explore all of those with Deputy Mayor for Business, Rajesh Agrawal. And Rajesh is also the co-deputy chair of the London Economic Action Partnership and is also the chair of London and Partners. We're also joined by Deputy Mayor Jules Pipe, who is the Deputy Mayor for Planning, but Regeneration, but also for Skills. Both Rajesh and Jules will be leaving at 11:30, so we're hoping to get all of our questions into you before then. We're also joined by Michelle Cuomo-Bora, who is Assistant Director for Skills and Employment. And about 10:30, we're also going to be joined by Deputy Mayor Justine Simons, because the Mayor has been very keen to see culture and the creative industries as part of the overall economic offer that he's made to Londoners. So, without further ado, we're going to move into our questions, but I think we're going to let first Rajesh and then Jules to have up to, but no longer than 5 minutes to make a statement, if you would wish to do that, to set out anything that you feel is important that you don't want us to miss. So we'll start with you, Rajesh.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chair. And can I begin by thanking you for inviting us to showcase the Mayor's achievement in delivering his manifesto commitments in relation to supporting London's economy to grow and prosper, create a fairer economy for all, and championing London's businesses. The Mayor committed to being the most pro-business mayor yet and working in partnership with the industry to deliver on skills, infrastructure and growth, and he has continued to bang the drum for London domestically as well as internationally. Since 2016, London's economic output has increased by 6.1%, along with an increase of 295,000 workforce jobs. Unemployment has fallen from 6% to 4.6%. And we have established a range of programs to engage and support businesses across London, including £100 million Greater London Investment Fund, which will support 170 companies and will create 3,500 new jobs. We've also created a business advisory board of 16 diverse business leaders to provide guidance and find solutions to London's growth challenges. We've launched London Growth Hub, a one-stop shop which delivers online business support. And to date, London Growth Hub has supported over 4,000 businesses. And just last week, the Mayor announced 5 physical Growth Hub sites in Vauxhall, Hammersmith, Woolwich, Croydon, and Tottenham. Back in 2016, the Mayor said that he will work in partnership with business to deliver solutions to the challenges that hold growth back and spread opportunities throughout the city. The biggest challenge he has to face is the economic black cloud of Brexit hanging over the economy and the uncertainty that it has created for our businesses. Uncertainty has deterred many businesses from investing since the referendum. Just last month, FTSE companies experienced their worst trading week since the referendum. We heard UK productivity has suffered the worst drop in 5 years, and the latest GDP figures show that the UK's economic growth is close to zero. What we are being offered now is a million miles away from what was promised in 2016. This deal is even worse than that negotiated with the EU by the current Prime Minister's predecessor. Indeed, the academic experts in UK in Changing Europe estimate that it would reduce per capita GDP by 6.4% as opposed to 4.9% under May's deal. And that's why whatever happens, the Mayor and I will be campaigning night and day for UK to remain in the EU, and I'll be urging everybody to do the same. But despite all of this uncertainty, all the evidence points that our economy is being hurt by any form of Brexit. But that doesn't mean that we can't still push forward and grow in the years ahead, even though it could be much weaker progress than that would have been otherwise the case. So whilst it has been a major challenge for London's economy, the Mayor has welcomed 1,200 people to the Mayor's event for EU citizens, of which over 500 were offered free immigration advice on the EU settlement scheme. Nearly 400 businesses have received Brexit preparedness support through the London Growth Hub, with plans to support a further 4,000 businesses to ensure that they remain resilient through Brexit. The Mayor's International Business Programme has supported more than 800 companies to make their international ambitions a reality, creating over 1,573 jobs, secured 193 million pounds in export wins, and generated 486 million pounds in investment. The Mayor has consistently stated the importance of ensuring the UK's post-Brexit immigration system and allow London to have skills that it needs from Europe and from the rest of the world. And huge number of work done around economic fairness, led by examples including the GLA family. So we are very proud of all the achievement that we have had in LAST since 2016.
Thank you. I'm trying to keep you to 5 minutes. And what I'm going to ask Assembly members to do, because I'm going to move straight on to Jules Pipe. I'm sure you've been sparked into immediately thinking of questions. But if you can hold any specific questions so that when we get to, when we're going to delve in more detail into Glyph, the growth hubs, Good Work Standard, and so on and so forth, if you can hold it until we get to those sections. So I'm going to move straight on to Deputy Mayor Jules Pipe. Jules.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you for the invitation to the committee. I mean, in a nutshell, I mean, what the Mayor's agenda is on skills, which is obviously the reason I'm here today, part of my brief, is to ensure that businesses in the capital have access to the skilled talent pool that they need to achieve the kind of outcomes that Rajesh has just been talking about. But also the flip side of that is to ensure that Londoners have the skills that they need to be able to take up those roles, to take full part in society and improve their social outcomes for them and their families. And sort of the third strand brings those together, putting in place the programme of work to practically deliver on those two headline outcomes about businesses and individuals. And the two practical things I'd highlight briefly are obviously the devolution of the adult education budget and its implementation. Unfortunately, I think all we can talk about that at the moment is the process and how well that went, both in terms from our perspective and what the team thinks, but also what providers think, because obviously it only began we only started dispersing the money in August. But it was a very complex and protracted negotiation with government. I think it took about 6 years, probably from start to finish. Obviously within the GLA, getting all the systems and processes in place to enable a smooth transition and make sure that it all happened on time and to schedule, and that providers weren't disadvantaged, and then in turn learners disadvantaged. Obviously to inform how we were going to go about that process, we weren't just going to simply roll everything over in perpetuity. We may as well just employed one person to carry on signing the same checks to the same organisation. So although we didn't want to rock the boat for providers in the first year, and we had committed to both them and government as part of the conditions for the transfer of the money, that we weren't going to be radical in the first year. But nevertheless, we've had to have a comprehensive programme of engagement with businesses and skills providers to understand their needs and how we'd go forward shaping the relationship and the kind of outcomes that the Mayor and London wants to see. And that although there have been some changes that we've made that we're very pleased with, particularly making the AB more inclusive, fully funding courses for people earning below the London living wage, was a big change. It was very much welcomed by providers, and hopefully in turn it will be welcomed by learners in that income range as well. And also as a first move in sort of widening accessibility to disadvantaged people, allowing the fully funding the first qualification in British Sign Language for deaf Londoners. Again, it's an example of the kind of steps that we'd be looking to make in the future, but that's the first one we've been able to make now. I realise you want to get on. I just briefly, though, mention that the second part of this, along with the AEB, is the delivery of a number of mayoral skills programmes. The two highlights, I'd say, are probably the digital skills programme, but also the Mayor's Construction Academy, which I can talk about at length later on, should you wish to. That's probably all I should want to say at the moment.
Oh, well, thank you. That's very good. Almost bang on exactly 5 minutes. That's much appreciated. And again, Assembly members, if you can just hold your thoughts on anything that has immediately come up from that to bring it up at appropriate points. I'm going to ask a sort of very broad question to start with, which you've both sort of talked through the things that have been achieved, but also contextualised it. How closely do you think the Mayor's current strategies and programmes resemble the promises that he made in his manifesto commitments? And I'll start with Jules first and then come back to Rajesh.
Yes, I mean, the principal programmes that I've just touched on were very much highlighted in his manifesto. The whole kind of Skills for Londoners agenda was a top line, only closely, only just behind the promises on home building. And of course, they are linked in terms of the one of the key strands under Skills for Londoners is the Construction Academy, about getting a skilled workforce to be able to deliver the number of homes that we need to build. Creating a tech talent pipeline as well, I think, was a line in the manifesto. And again, the digital skills programme is in there to deliver on that. I'm pretty sure ESOL was mentioned in the manifesto as well, and so we're doing work on that and expanding access to that. So I think there's a whole series of key skills. All the skills manifesto pledges are here. All apprenticeships as well, and work on that. Although that is a bit more of an uphill struggle given the apprenticeship levy and how difficult that is in London. But nevertheless, I believe all the manifesto points on skills are being taken through to delivery.
Okay, so I think that says you're putting a tick, I think, in the box there to say that the manifesto commitments have mostly been coming to fruition. Turning to you, Rajesh, in terms of business, we've looked at skills there. How closely do you think the Mayor's current strategies and programmes resemble the original manifesto commitments?
Well, as closely as it can be, of course. The Mayor's manifesto was developed before the UK voted to leave the EU.
Of course.
So that has changed a lot of things, but the current strategy is constantly, the Mayor continues to bang the drum for London. We are still seeing some of the large tech companies like Facebook, Amazon, continually sort of investing in London, doing huge number of business support projects. And at the heart of the Mayor's manifesto commitment were two things. One was that he'll be the most pro-business mayor yet, which means that consulting with businesses in decision making and policy making. So he's done that regularly, in touch with businesses, meeting the CEOs of companies from around the world, but also the Business Advisory Board, the London Business Board. So constant engagement and taking input from business community. And the second was he was the economic fairness, which is at the heart of the Mayor's manifesto. Since 2016, we've doubled the London living wage. Accredited employer, 100% increase, which is fantastic. We've recently also launched the Good Work Standard. Already about 40 large employers have signed up to the Good Work Standard, and of course leading by example, not just asking businesses to do, but also all the GLA family organizations are also accredited to the Good Work Standard.
Okay, now I'm going to start with you this time and then come on to Jules. What has the Mayor implemented which was not set out in his manifesto? You mentioned Brexit, and I presume that some of the things that he's done were not things in the manifesto, because at that point Brexit hadn't happened when the manifesto was being written. Is there anything else that he's done that was not in the manifesto?
Well, it's around sort of a lot of things revolve around Brexit. For example, in order to, in response to Brexit, we increased the global footprint of London and partners so that we can continue sort of banging the drum for London. We never thought we'll have to market London in Europe, but we have now two offices, one in Paris and one in Berlin, helping London businesses to prepare for Brexit readiness. And that has taken a lot of our effort, a lot of planning. The amount of uncertainty that businesses are facing is huge.
Okay, so Brexit has been such a large issue in terms of the uncertainty that you mentioned and so many different aspects that it's impacted, that's been the main area that he's had to deal with, which was not originally set out in the manifesto. Jules, is there anything that you feel on the skills front that he has had to implement in terms of skills? I don't know whether it's had the same impact in the skills area, in terms of things that weren't in the manifesto that he's been obliged to implement or has developed an interest in and decided to implement?
Well, I think the difficulty answering the question is that because the manifesto was so detailed, it's kind of, what wasn't in there in a way. There are obviously detailed things that weren't mentioned. Things like the Skills for London Innovation Fund as well, about sort of incentivising AEP providers, to develop more kind of industry related provision. I'm not sure that all the things that we're doing now are necessarily listed. I mean, yes, he did mention construction, obviously, in the manifesto through the Construction Academy, and also creative industries. But I suppose the health and social care angle, I doubt was mentioned in the manifesto, but obviously has come up before, and that does link back to Brexit. Hospitality industry as well. Likewise, there will be there is a need to focus more on that perhaps than we probably if Brexit wasn't going ahead.
I suppose just to add to that, the other thing that wasn't in the manifesto was the expansion of the Enterprise Advisor Network. So that is business people going into schools and colleges and advising young people, and that was expanded through the Mayor's investment.
Because of the devolution of the AEB?
Not because of that, but in concert with that.
Right. I mean, I was going to ask you a specific question about, what impact did the EU referendum result in June 2016 have on the Mayor's policy and implementation plans, but I think we've already kind of threaded that through into your answers. But I am going to ask you, Jules, if there are any major manifesto commitments that the Mayor has not been able to implement and why. And then I'm going to come and ask you the same thing, Rajesh. Any major commitments?
No, I don't think there are any. I mean, obviously, a number of them are work in train. I mean, he wants to see better outcomes, more relevant industry outcomes from colleges, but that's going to take, we've done a lot of work and put things in train for that to happen, but obviously the outputs and outcomes are down the line. But I don't think there's anything that hasn't begun.
I don't think the question that we're asking is, has he finished everything he started or said he wanted to start from the manifesto? It's about the ability to, implement things, and we obviously expect after 3.5 years that some of those things won't necessarily have been finished, but you feel that there's nothing major that hasn't been implemented. Rajesh, is there anything?
Sorry, Chair, actually, could I just, I could fill that out a little more, in as much as, so a good example perhaps might be careers advice and guidance, that I'm pretty sure that was mentioned in the manifesto. The Mayor has done what it was within his power, which, for example, is the expansion of the Enterprise Advisor Network, and to so there's a good example there, but in our call to action that we'll probably get onto, we're obviously asking for the re-establishment of a proper careers advice and guidance service, preferably in the whole country, but certainly the Mayor is calling for it to be established in London, and that to achieve that we would like to see it devolved to the capital in the same way AEB has devolved, but preferably at the kind of funded at levels that it was historically, not at the levels that it's funded now. So obviously there's a lot of further work the Mayor can do that would fit with his position in the manifesto, and so it hasn't necessarily started, because all we can do is actually lobby and call for that devolution to happen.
Okay. Rajesh, is there anything major in terms of business manifesto commitments that the Mayor has not been able to implement, and why?
No, I think pretty much everything that the Mayor promised in the manifesto has been started. Of course, it has been quite difficult with the things going around Brexit and the government's handling of Brexit and the subsequent the policy around.
Okay, Susan Hall would just like to come in on that.
Yes, you really believe that Brexit is of concern to business?
Of course.
Right, okay. Well, what do we do then when there's a report, and I'll quote, Corbyn becoming PM is a worse threat to business than Brexit, and that's a report by Morgan Stanley. It said that if Labour win, it could damage the valuations of UK companies. What do we do about that?
I'm very happy to hold the Deputy Mayors to account for many things, but for the outcome of the general election and who is the leader of either of the parties, I think is probably slightly above their pay scale. So,
nevertheless,
I think unfortunately that's not really a question for the Deputy Mayors in this committee.
It is, because much has been made of Brexit, and the damage that that may cause, in some people's view, to business, if Morgan Stanley are actually saying that actually a worse threat could be something else, surely we should be preparing for a worse threat, and it was in The Guardian, which obviously I don't necessarily favour. It said that Corbyn becoming PM is a worse threat to business. I do think we should be looking into it. It's a threat.
Well, I think we're very surprised that The Guardian isn't your normal reading at Assembly Member Hall. I can hear others.
Do for a laugh.
Others are.
If I want a bit of a laugh,
Others are surprised as well. No, I don't think we can really ask that. I think what the Deputy Mayor was talking about was uncertainty, and I think whether you're in favour of Brexit or whether you're against Brexit, I think we can all agree that there has been a lot of uncertainty about how the Brexit process is going to be concluded. Assembly Member Sean Bailey would now like to come in on Brexit.
No, just partially. You spoke a morning regression. You spoke a lot about Brexit and the uncertainty there, but most of the challenges facing London business predate Brexit. What work has been done on those? Could you highlight some of the big issues that businesses are always focusing on, and what the Mayor and your office has done to address those?
I mean, of course, you can link so many things to Brexit, but at the same time, a lot of this has been sort of business as usual as well. So banging the drum for London, access to finance was a challenge even sort of before. Businesses always face a big challenge, access to finance, and that's why the Mayor has launched the Greater London Investment Fund, involving businesses in policy making via different advisory boards, banging the drum for London worldwide, championing London living wage. So there are many things which sort of are continue and supporting the businesses as well. So both small and medium-sized businesses, helping them internationalize, for example, throughout the Mayor's International Business Programme, helping the businesses grow within the UK through our business growth program. So there have been a number of challenges that businesses face generally as well, which have been taken, which we continue to address.
Okay.
So my final question, and then we'll move on to some other areas with you both. How will the Mayor be measuring the success of his 2016 manifesto? Now, I'm going to start with Jules. Obviously, you report directly to the Mayor. He presumably has a series of targets, things that he wants you to achieve. What are the metrics? How is he measuring your performance in terms of making sure that you're seeing through the areas around skills that he wants you to be taking action on?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there are a number of targets on things like apprenticeships, but largely it's the introduction of the new approaches and schemes, which are, the obviously one being the AEB, which the successful implementation of it is the test rather than a particular sort of numerical metric. However, within the AEB, that really does give rise to sort of an interesting area that we're exploring about outcomes and how you measure those, because at the end of the day we say, well, we want people better qualified, more suitably qualified, and better matched to the skills needs out in the capital. But also there's the issue of the social outcomes as well, because AEB doesn't just fund sort of further education qualifications that will aid people in employment. There are lots of kind of well-being outcomes which are obviously furthered and improved by adult community learning, for example. But there aren't any metrics for those, so we're having to develop them. And so we have a whole strand that a member of the LEAP board is chairing to look at the outcomes that we'll be looking for from the AEB.
Yeah, just to add to that on the adult education budget, around 43% of all of the qualifications that are delivered in that year have no destination data attached to them. So we don't know what happens to 43% of those currently. So the work that we're trying to focus on moving forward is what happens to that 43%. Are they going into education? Are they in paid employment? or are they furthering themselves in another way through volunteering, for example? So the work of the team working with Angus Niles Cutler from the LEAP has been focusing on how do we measure the impact of the qualifications that are being undertaken so that we can measure the outcome and impact of the adult education budget moving forward, and therefore measure the impact of the changes the Mayor is making through things like funding the London Living learners up to London Living Wage and deaf learning, for example.
So that's very interesting, isn't it? Because one of the things for us is not just that lots of people attend the Construction Academy, for example, or lots of people go through apprenticeships, or, you know, the apprenticeship levy is spent in a sensible way, or that the devolution of the adult education budget is a great thing and that it's spent on this, that and the other. We also want to know what those outcomes are. So that's surprising that those measures of some of those things are not in place, and I think the committee would very much welcome when they are in place, as I'm sure you will, to know not just that someone's gone through some sort of skills training or retraining, but they're also then able to make use of it productively in the London economy.
Yeah, so working with business, we've sort of identified a series of outcomes, whether those are social outcomes or whether they're economic outcomes. And the next stage is how do we ensure that we can measure that across the adult education budget, whether that's through additional data requests from providers or whether that's a survey of Londoners who are undertaking that training to see where they go and how we can amend that funding to be more impactful.
And unfortunately, it is the case that it probably is going to have to be a survey, which will still only be qualitative in terms of indicating, you know, the success of this. But the ultimate would be comprehensive destination data, ultimate destination data for individuals. But I think that's a data matching exercise involving the DWP and all the colleges that's not, I think it's just beyond the scope of certainly City Hall, and it's not something that the government seems to be, you know, any government, this isn't a party political point, this is just simply, you know, the government as an entity is not geared up and focused on doing this.
Well, that's a shame, but trying to get government departments to talk to each other and talk to City Hall, I think is probably beyond the scope of this committee, as I'm sure it's beyond the scope of most people.
It's a DWP issue, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we are pursuing that. So we are pursuing something called the Leo data. It comes to us 2 years after, so it is quite far out. That does give us an idea about where people go. It links the sort of Treasury data, HMRC data, through to the DFE, DWP, but it is very long. It takes a long time.
And by
to
the
get
time
there.
you get it, it's quite old then.
It's
really.
very old, so we can use
patchy.
it and patchy. We can use it to give us an indication, but we can't give it. We can't use it in any meaningful way currently.
Okay, well, thanks. That's very interesting, if slightly unsatisfactory. And the same question really for you, Rajesh. Presumably there are targets and metrics that when you're sitting down with the Mayor, he can say, well, you know, you've done a great job, you've achieved this, or what's going on about that. So what are the metrics that are being applied to looking at how the Mayor is delivering for businesses in London?
So different programs have got different sort of metrics. So for example, if there is a sort of our program called Tech Invest, where we put startups and angel investors together, where the objective is that the investors invest in startups. So in that case, the matrix would be around how much money is raised. If it is the Greater London Investment Fund, it would be around how much money has been invested, how many jobs it has resulted in, how many, if it is a business support program, then how many businesses have been supported as a result of that. If it is a sort of Mayor's International Business Program, it could include things like how many deals have actually been done with the companies abroad, how many companies have actually benefited directly by having a physical presence there, and so on. So ultimately it all links to how many jobs have been created, GVA, economic output, and also it's about reaching out to the communities which are very hard to reach otherwise. So for example, on Greater London Investment Fund, it's about reaching out to women founders, where the industry average is extremely low. So in America, for example, 98% of the VC money actually is invested in businesses founded by men and only 2% women. BME founded businesses also receive significantly lower amount of funding as well. So some of those metrics are also very important in whatever we do. So in our case, in the previous round of our London Co-Investment Fund, the women-founded businesses were 22%, whereas the industry average is about 9%, but we want to see it even higher. So those are the sort of metrics. Are we reaching out to those hard to reach out communities or not?
Okay, so that's an interesting set of metrics and possibly slightly more measurable, and you referred to some of the figures for the number of businesses invested in, the money raised and so on and so forth at GVA in your initial remarks. So thank you for setting that out. And I'm now going to move on to Assembly Member Sean Bailey, who's going to go more into the area of business support.
Morning. I'm going to stray a teeny bit into skills as well, Jules, because there's a question that I need answered, and also Michelle. So I think the criticism would be, and the test would be, has the mayor been the most pro-business mayor yet? Because I don't recognise all of these. What are the measures? You talked about some of the things that are obvious that are measured, but some of them are not. So, for instance, what are the metrics around setting up London and Partners internationally? What exactly are we hoping to get back for that money?
So again, the metrics are very clear in terms of, so first of all, there's a bit of a firefighting element as well. In terms of with all the uncertainty around Brexit, it's quite important that we proactively respond to the challenges which have been created, all the uncertainty that Brexit has created in the minds of investors. And part of sort of, again, the manifesto commitment around banging the drum for London, which is what essentially London and Partners does. But the matrix around London and Partners is very clear on FDI investment that have come through, the jobs that has created, plus around the GVA.
But
gross
is that
value
true?
added
Because
in London.
Sorry, London and Partners has regularly been tested by people on this horseshoe about the opaque nature of their data. Is there any direct proof that they've added to our GVA? So if you're going to expand that, which I accept leave or stay, people could argue that there's a job to be done about keeping London at the top. But what is the direct metric for the money involved? If I asked you how much extra we have given to London and Partners, what would you answer me?
Well, it's about 1.8 million.
Right. What do we expect the impact of that money to be?
Well, we impact, I mean, I can set you a sort of entire set of metrics and the targets that they are accountable for. And in fact, in this assembly, I've come several times and we've made it clear, and I'm very happy to send more information about how their performance is measured. And what we expect directly as a result.
But that would be my point. We have seen several times, and we're not that much clearer on how they're being measured. If we give £1.8 million to an activity, what are we looking back for? Are we looking for a 1, 10, 100% growth in something else? What is that something else? And where is it? Where could I, as a member of the public, find that information? Because it's very easy to say pro-business, Mayor, but we have to demonstrate that in hard, cold facts. Where are those facts kept?
Well, those are cold facts. I mean, the fact is that the investment has grown. I mean, despite all the challenges, the hard cold fact is basically the mayor has engaged with businesses. Mayor has taken advice and input from businesses in whatever we have done. I mean, the huge range of programs that we have, and they've all got clear metrics. I mean, if you ask me about any specific one, I'm happy to sort of.
Well, I've just asked you
more
specifically about London and Partners. You haven't been able to tell me, do we expect an uplift or anything in any particular place? So
no, it would be an uplift in terms of GVA. I mean, that's what I mean. That
how
if
much?
I mean, I couldn't give the figure on top of my head specifically for that.
Are you able to supply that to us afterwards? I certainly went to the London and Partners AGM, and I know they've got very specific figures that were available in the annual report from London and Partners at the AGM. Perhaps that could be provided to the committee.
Can I also take, I'm very happy to do so, and can I also take this opportunity that for last 3 years since I've been the chair of London Partners, we invite assembly members. I mean, it would be for their benefit to come and they'll get some of these questions answered.
So to be clear, this is not about London Partners. London Partners is just an example I pick out. What I'm talking about is this administration has regularly been criticised for not giving specific metrics. I'm just asking you for specific metrics. That's just one thing. You talk about a pro-business mayor. Do you not believe it's important to lay out the metrics in a way that's easy for Londoners to find and then provide those answers? That's my direct question. Because you say these things, but the evidence is very, very hard to find.
No, I mean, it's clearly available, and in fact, we have sent the evidence in the past. We have reached out to Assembly members. I mean, I'm not sure what more we can do, but we have provided enough times, Assembly members.
I think that's where the problem lies. You should be more sure about what you could do to make it clearer to people, because to be clear, this is not just
people are
my
clear.
feeling.
I'm just not sure of some of the Assembly members.
We have this all the time with Assembly members in several different arenas about the lack of clarity, the lack of hard metrics, success points that you're measuring your performance against. That's why I say this. Let me move on, because I think we have to agree to disagree on that. For instance, our own research points out that only 23% of the actions around this area, or your actions around this area, are measurable, but yet you tell me everything is measurable. Are these figures correct? Are only 23% of the actions of your department measurable?
Where did you get those numbers
It
from?
comes
I
out of the
disagree with
report
those
that the
numbers. I
Assembly
don't recognize those numbers.
I will send you the report. Normally you send me one. It's the Assembly report, by the way.
One that we've disagreed with.
Yeah, it's the Assembly report. I will send it to you. And maybe,
Give him a copy.
oh, there you go. Give him a
It's got
copy.
factual errors in it. Can I just say, Chair, I'm aware that these two witnesses have to go in
Yes.
45 minutes and we haven't actually
That's why I was saying,
started
I
the
think
major
we want,
questions.
where things are coming up that are detailed, perhaps, that's why I said you could send over the details later.
It's the research. It's the
This is
research
the
unit.
mapping the mayor's strategies. It's from the research unit. But obviously, if the deputy mayor has not seen it,
Well, he should have seen it, Chair.
well, I mean, I don't think you can expect necessarily everything from the research unit to be looked at by
I would,
all of the
you're
deputy
correct, Chair,
mayors.
but I'd argue that's one of the biggies. If you're going to read one, it should probably be that one. But let's move on, because the Chair is definitely right about time. How many businesses have received an accreditation for the Good Work Standard? And how do you intend to grow the standard and increase its accreditation?
40 businesses, employers so far have received the accreditation. Another around 50 are in pipeline. And of course, the 40 that they have received, it's not just the number of businesses, but also it's the number of employees. About 184,000 employees have benefited out of these sort of 40 businesses, 40 employers being accredited. And we continue to reach out to businesses, try and weave this in a lot of different ways, including the procurement strategy. So we've got about it's part of our procurement plan as well. So using the procurement powers that the mayor has to promote a good work standard, but reaching out to businesses in general. Just today evening, we've got business reception hosted here in City Hall.
Okay.
Again, promoting it to businesses there.
Let me ask you a question. What was your target? How many businesses do you hope to have by this point?
So again, this is, we've recently launched it. This has been quite recently launched. I think the important thing is, rather than having arbitrary targets when the businesses are already facing huge amount of uncertainty with Brexit,
But
facing the no-deal Brexit in a few days' time, which is still not completely...
But my point is, the only question I'm asking you, I accept what you're saying, did you have a target? What was it? Did you want 10 businesses or 10,000 businesses?
No, again, I'm saying it's not just about having number of businesses, it's about how many people it affects as well. And in both cases, we don't want to go out and just set arbitrary targets on day one. I think it's very important, because this has never been done before. And I appreciate that, that the sort of being the most pro-business mayor yet, considering the previous mayor, the bar is quite low. But I think
if the bar is so low, it should be easy to set a target. I mean,
No.
if the only point I'm making is you have this initiative, you have no idea, or certainly I don't, because you're unable to tell me if it's been a success or not. And the reason I ask that, because imagine it has been a massive success, then we should repeat it.
Well,
and
you
if it
can't
hasn't, then we
expect
shouldn't.
whether it's success or not within a couple of months of launching. I think it's important to actually see, because this has never been done before, to actually see, and then rather than setting arbitrary targets. all the programs have got arbitrary targets and have got the targets, which we are very happy to sort of share. But on this, because we've recently launched it, there's no point in just setting yourself, just like the government in the past have done with the immigration numbers, just pluck numbers from the air and set the numbers. I completely disagree with having arbitrary targets.
All I'm saying is I just feel like you need to have some scope, some ballpark figure for what you're aiming at. But let me just move on to talk more of the quality. There are other business improvement standards and models that are available to employers. Why would they choose the Good Work standard?
So again, we've consulted with number of businesses, private sector, public sector, local government, third sector. We've worked very closely with CIPD to make sure that we are not duplicating some of the work which is already done by some of the other accreditation, but actually it's all encompassing. Again, using the procurement power, for example, could be one thing. Being London Living Wage accredited is at the heart of it. So that's one of the criteria which is compulsory for being the Good Work Standard accreditation as well. So we are making sure that there is no duplication, but it's actually complementary to what already exists.
How do you know that the business benefits associated with the Good Work Standard are having an impact? Because isn't it right that the good businesses would already be doing this stuff? Or are you suggesting that you're helping business develop tactics that they wouldn't normally use?
Well, I think, see, not all businesses have got not everything is on their minds sometimes. So the purpose of Good Work Standard is to encourage businesses achieve the highest benchmark for employment. And this is what we are trying to do. So the businesses, there could be things which they are doing, there could be things which they are not doing. So that's why it's quite, whether it's around mental health, whether it's around employment well-being, whether it's about recognizing trade unions, fair pay, flexible working, diversity in workforce. So there is a huge number of different criteria. And it just gets, and I say this as an entrepreneur as well, that it gets, in my business, by the way, is signed up one of the early cohorts.
I'd expect it to be.
Yeah.
It's your initiative.
Before you ask me. But it's important as an entrepreneur. Sometimes you don't necessarily, businesses will not think about all of those things. So it gets them thinking that, oh, maybe I could do that as well for the employees. Maybe I could do that.
Okay, just a quick teeny question to Jules. You talked about a London-wide careers advice sort of thing and wishing to have one, asking for the power. But do you have any criteria for that? Because I come from a youth work background, and the last time we did that, not my words, but people judged it to be a spectacular failure, an expensive one. So if you're asking for those powers, do you have an idea of what you would actually want?
Yeah, I mean, we'd want to work closely with boroughs to re-establish a careers service and advice and guidance that was, more familiar to us in the past, when there actually was comprehensive provision. So the Mayor's not proposing to have a kind of a City Hall-based single door. It would be about the re-establishment of local provision, but obviously bringing some sort of uniformity to it, because actually in so many of these areas that we're kind of touching on today, it's the unevenness of provision that needs tackling, and better coordination. I mean, I won't take up the committee's time, but I mean, a lot of what's needs tackling in, say, construction skills provision is about better coordination and bringing the different actors together rather than trying to reinvent the wheel. So that's a good example of where the Mayor committed to create a construction skills academy, but didn't create one single City Hall building and, right, we will train people from this. It was actually about trying to better coordinate what's already going on between the colleges, the private provision that happens on construction sites, and getting a potential stream of young construction people in place. So again, that's a kind of a similar model that we would look at if the government did make a move on devolving careers advice and guidance. Meanwhile, again, coordination pending that sort of kind of that more developed offer, we've got the Enterprise Advisor Network, which again is a kind of a coordination thing. The Mayor hasn't got a single office where we're trying to give that advice and guidance to secondary schools. Instead, it's about coordinating with the volunteers.
I see what you're saying, but you're asking for a power. You can't go to government with what you've just said, which is effectively a sentiment, and
power
ask
and
for a
funding.
specific power.
Well,
You
it's
have to
probably
give
more
some kind of-
funding than power, really.
And I think it's also it's about that universal offer on careers. So whilst there is an absolute need for young people's careers advice and guidance, and we hear that again and again and again from employers, there's also a substantial need for adults. That's where we also feel that the current government offer is lacking. It focuses on a very small target group, whereas we know actually learning has to be lifelong now. Changes in technology, the change in business is meaning that you can't go into a job when you're 17, 18, 19 and stay in that job. You constantly need to have that CPD or different learning to help you stay in work and progress as well. And that's where we also feel adult careers is really important, and trying to create that universal model all the way through to support Londoners.
I agree and understand what you're both saying, but the criticism must be it's very easy to ask for power, to act like you're doing something. You need to give more bones to your request, don't you?
We have moved quite a long way from the area of questions, which was supposed to be around the Good Work Standard and then London and
I'd
Partners.
argue that careers advice is close.
Okay, well, I would not agree. Can I bring in Assembly Member Onka Sahota, and I think also Assembly Member Caroline Russell wanted to ask something about the Good Work Standard.
Yes, my colleague has been talking a lot about targets, and of course targets can be misleading. I know, for example, that when the government fails itself, particularly in the NHS, right, on the, say, 4-hour waiting times in any department, they just got rid of the targets. So targets can be misleading sometimes, and targets can also skew the outcomes, particularly in the context of the Good Work Standard, and I've been involved with it. Do you not think so that in launching a new program, it's important to pilot them out and see what the impact is, right, before you start setting yourself targets, right? Because if you set your targets which are unrealistic, then you are setting yourself to fail. So I just want to say, was that part of your thinking, right, when you launched the Good Work Standard?
Yeah, I mean, this is why we've had a big consultation period. So it was not a straightforward, we just didn't come up with something. It was a very collegiate approach. We worked closely with CIPD, trade unions, private sector organizations, public sector organizations, third sector organizations, and employers of different sizes, different sectors. And the idea was exactly the same, that we want it to make it so that it's easy to adopt, not just for the large organizations who've got the resources and the HR departments and so on, but also for SMEs, because 50% of Londoners are employed by SMEs. And that's why I think before you just start setting yourselves, you know the outcome that you want to achieve, but at the same time, you don't want to arbitrarily sort of pick targets, because you want the right outcomes, and that's what it is. So, yeah, I mean, this is at that stage, which is the early stage, but we are going sort of full steam ahead
Great.
now,
Thank you.
promoting it.
Thank you. The other thing, of course, in London, right, is that, Chair, I hope this is the right point to ask this question, is about the business rates. That has had a huge impact on business here, and particularly the business rate increases have been disproportionately affecting London. And I know that the Mayor has no direct powers over business rates, but what representation have we made to the government about making sure that the impact of those adverse impacts of business rates, which are disproportionately affecting London, are taken into account, and particularly in the context that the business which is based on the internet, right, doesn't have to pay business rates, and of course the high streets shops do have to pay, and that's having a huge impact on the high streets also.
Well, the Mayor has constantly lobbied for lobbied for lowering and changing the way it works. So, for example, the rateable threshold for council taxes in London is 12,000. So, if it is below 12,000, then it's completely there is a full relief that small businesses get. Now, in Scotland, it's 15,000. And it just doesn't make sense. And so the Mayor has constantly lobbied that it should be raised so that it's about 15,000. and it doesn't make sense for the entire England to have exactly some. There has to be a regional aspect to it. So you can't have the same sort of rate relief in Camden as in Cumbria, and that needs to change. We continue to lobby the government to change that. We work very closely with businesses, small businesses. Some of them find it extremely hard with this big increase, which is of nearly £1 billion actually, which is disproportionate, and it will hit London businesses quite heavily.
Thank you.
Caroline Russell. Sean, I'm coming back to you anyway. For
Thank
the
you.
next
I'm just
question
checking that you're coming back to me, Chair.
I am.
that's
London.
all.
We haven't got to your question on London and Partners.
No, we have
And can I
not.
just remind everyone that it is now 5 to 11 and we've got a whole other section to get through. Caroline.
Very briefly, this committee suggested in one of our responses to the strategies that we responded to a couple of years ago that the Mayor should be taking action to support creative businesses to take up the Good Work standard. And I just wondered whether there's been any work done on that. I don't know whether that would be for Justine or for Rajesh, but...
I mean, there has been, so we continue to work and champion across sort of different, and I think some of the industry sectors are quite important. Some are easier to get to, some are slightly harder to get to. So for example, hospitality is one of those. So
Yes, I'm more thinking about kind of creative businesses, culture businesses,
Yes.
And those more marginal businesses very often working in kind of, railway arch type spaces and
Yes.
things like that. Are you reaching out to those creative businesses that are part of the engine of a thriving economy to get them involved in the Good Work standard, or are you just reaching out to the bigger businesses?
No, I think the ambition is to reach out to all businesses, big and small, or especially on the sort of culture and creative industry sector, because 1 in 6 jobs in London is in that sector. So you cannot not.
So perhaps you could come back to me afterwards
Yes.
with the information about how many of you've got 40 accredited Good Work standard businesses and another 50 in the pipeline.
Yeah.
How many of those are in that creative sector?
Of course.
But I don't expect you to have an answer to it
Of
off
course.
the top, so if you could write with that would be great.
Thank you.
Okay. Just on the Good Work standard, is it useful for individual assembly members who either represent London-wide or represent particular constituencies to be in touch with you about whether local employers have applied to become Good Work Standard accredited? Because I've got some companies in my constituency who are interested in this, and are there specific people that we should put them in contact with in your team?
Yes, I would very much welcome that. And just all assembly members, we are all champion. I think it's a great Good Work Standards, fantastic initiative, and I urge all the assembly members to help us champion that.
Okay, well, perhaps when you write to us about a couple of other things, if you could give us the name of a specific person that we could be in contact with,
Okay,
that would
I
be
will provide.
very helpful. And now we're going to come back to Assembly Member Sean Bailey. He's going to ask you about London and Partners.
Just before I ask about London Partners, let me just ask Justine a particular question. In the creative industry, are your challenges around training, are they particular or
No,
different?
can we stick with London and Partners? This is not your question.
I just wanted to
sorry,
complete
but
that
I
bit
haven't
because Uncle
introduced
went down that
Justine,
line.
and she's not, so can you please stick with London and Partners? If you want to ask about
Sorry,
creative
Justine. Maybe you could
industries,
pick up later.
there's
Yes.
a different part of the
Okay,
questioning
relax.
when
I'm
we'll
going
get
to
to
answer the
that.
question. How has London and Partners' approach to securing inward investment and business activity changed since 2016? Because you talked a lot earlier on, Rajesh, about all the uncertainty, but you also talked about the fact that we've had lots of big companies come here and the economy has grown since 2016, etc. So are London Partners doing anything new? Have they changed the way that they're attracting funds to London? Particularly because we're set up abroad
This
as
is
well.
partly your answer to your previous question around what is being done with that extra money that has been given. So extra resources have been deployed. The strategy has been slightly changed as well, so it's become more focused strategy. So we are focusing on sort of 5 key markets, if you like. So US, India, China, and I mean, these are the sort of the new growing markets, and of course Europe within it, mainly France and Germany. But we are focusing on these key markets. So there has been change of sort of more focused approach, if you like.
What does that look like? Do you spend more time there? Are you focusing on particular industries in those countries? Are you bringing particular parts of our economy so that they can see?
So we've got more boots on ground. So in each of these locations, we've got 2 or 3 people, I mean, sometimes 1, 2 or 3 people, offices who are plugged in, who are in a co-working space. So they are identifying the high growth companies from there and then trying to attract. So of course, I mean, it's, you could have any sector, but focusing on high growth companies. And that's why sort of pursuing themselves in a co-working space is very helpful, and then try and bring them here. In London, we also work closely with DIT. So if there are leads sort of particularly related to London, that's very helpful. We've also developed something called the Talent Toolkit. One of the main reasons why companies are attracted to London is because the amazing pool of talent we have. And frankly, that is at risk because of the uncertainty around Brexit and also the immigration policy of the government, which is not business friendly, really. I mean, businesses are always complaining about that, and that's why we've given them a talent toolkit which help them retain their current employees here who are from Europe or elsewhere, but also help them provide more information on the current sort of visa regime, how they can find it easy to attract new talent.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to bring in Assembly Member Caroline Russell, who's going to ask about the London living wage.
Thank you very much. We had a response to a question that this committee put about the number of people who were working at night who were paid the London living wage, and there was some very good data produced that said that there are 1.6 million people working at night, and more than 530,000 of them are paid less than the London living wage. And that is almost twice as many people working at night paid less than the living wage than the people working in the daytime. And I just wondered whether that data came out, I think, in 2018, and I just wondered whether there's been any movement, whether you've done anything to encourage more people to pay the London living wage, the nighttime employers, whether there's any work going on in that area.
So again, my colleague Amy Lame, who's the night czar, would be able to sort of throw more light on that. But Good Work Standard, something sort of more which we've only launched quite recently, but we aim to target all the sectors, and I just mentioned hospitality is also one of the big, because in hospitality sector there's a large number of employees. It's part of the sort of nighttime economy often as well. So it's very important to reach out with that, and my team is working very closely with Amy Lame to then sort of reach out to those sectors.
Perhaps you could come back to us afterwards with some information about whether the numbers have changed since that data was first produced, and also exactly what has been done to try to increase the number of people working at night who are paid the London living wage. So that would be 2 bits of information that if we can make sure we get afterwards. Thank you. And then obviously it's very encouraging that the proportion of employers who are living wage accredited has gone up during the current mayoralty, but it's still 1,600 employers, and I realise that's double what there was when this mayoralty started. But do you think that there's a bit of confusion amongst employers between the living wage and the Good Work Standard? And do you have active programs to encourage people to sign up to the living wage, or are you entirely focused on getting people to sign up to the Good Work Standard, which is a bigger thing and a bit more complicated?
Yeah,
do you think there's a tension there?
I don't think there is any confusion, because they are very complementary. In fact, to be a living wage accredited employer is the sort of one of the key mandatory requirements to become a Good Work Standard. But Good Work Standard is more encompassing on all different aspects of employment. It's not just about fair pay. Fair pay is a very important part of it, and compulsory almost for for that. We encourage employers to become London living wage paying employers and sign up for good work standard. And because there's a sort of whole process around it, so it's not something that can be done straight away, but there is a whole sort of process behind it, and that's why it's slightly more comprehensive piece of work. But we have tried to make it as easy as possible for small and medium-sized businesses to get accredited as well. London living wage, if you are paying a London living wage, then to be accredited it is a lot simpler, I suspect, because it's just about one thing. Why not?
And finally, on the, sort of living wage and good work standard, I just wondered if the Mayor's declaration of a climate emergency has prompted any kind of review of the good work standard conditions, because if the Mayor, as the Mayor has declared a climate emergency, does that impact on the nature, the relationship with growth, and on the way a good work standard employer would behave? Have you thought of reviewing the good work standard to take on board the climate emergency?
And I think I'm going to intervene at this point because we are running slightly short of time, and as the Mayor declared a climate emergency in December 2018, which was before the good work standard was launched, I think I'm going to rule your question out, because the climate emergency declaration came before the good work standard was launched, so it should have been incorporated as a matter of course. But perhaps we could write
the good work standard was very late. It
perhaps
had been,
we could
but yes.
write to the Deputy Mayor and ask him to set out whether or not the requirements of meeting the climate emergency are incorporated into the good work standard as an alternative, just to try and keep us to time. We've got a lot of questions and we've only got 25 minutes left, if you don't mind. I'd like to bring in Assembly Member Joanne McCartney, who wants to ask something about local growth hubs and local industrial strategy in some other areas.
Yeah, my first question is to Rajesh. You announced in your opening that the Mayor is moving from an online-only growth hub to setting up some local hubs. Can I ask, how are they going to be evaluated so that you can make sure that they are actually making a difference?
So again, it's about the number of business supported and the how they have sort of benefited from it is quite important. And you know, again, the whole reasoning behind having physical locations and as opposed to just having online one was also to reach out to those businesses who would not otherwise will be able to reach out for help. So there's a sort of online, but also at the same time the offline, where businesses could set an appointment, go and consult. I mean, particularly focused on sort of boroughs like Tottenham and Vauxhall and Hammersmith, Woolwich, Croydon. So it's about reaching out to those businesses. And so mainly criteria is about how many businesses are actually directly benefiting from it.
I noticed that in the Mayor's press release, he said that on the permanent local hubs that you signed a lease for 2 years. So I know the initial advice is particularly around Brexit preparedness, but moving off from that, it is going to be general business advice.
There will be, and already there are things that are done which are non-Brexit related as well through the Growth Hub, where we do a lot of master classes. So for example, it could be advising a small business how to use social media to attract more customers, or things around sort of employment contracts and things like that. Or we are doing something called the property advice service. So if you are taking a new premises for the first time, we'll help you negotiate the lease, or if you are renewing the lease, we'll help you renegotiate it as well. So there is already some non-Brexit related work that is being done through Growth Hub.
Good, and I know the LEAP invests in initiatives such as the Growth Hubs, but the Mayor often talks about good growth. I'm just wondering how you measure good growth as opposed to general economic growth. I don't know whether that's for Jules or Rajesh, probably Jules, I think.
Well, I suppose good growth is a qualitative thing, I think, rather than a quantitative thing. I know when I'm most often asked about the difference between good and bad growth when it comes to development.
Yeah.
And I think, growth at sort of any cost to the environment, growth that doesn't take into account local communities, and so on, that is bad growth. Good growth, the opposite. It's something that benefits local communities as much as incoming new communities. It's not at the expense of the environment and so on. So I think it's a qualitative approach and quality of outcomes rather than something I can easily measure. But it's something that you know what it is when you see it.
And is that something that the LEAP, for example, takes on board when it decides where to invest the money that's available to London?
Certainly in the areas that I'm involved in, the LEAP Investment Committee, which is looking at the kind of regeneration projects that are invested in, which are very much kind of local level initiatives. It is driven by the good growth agenda, and similarly the Skills for Capital, Skills for Londoners Capital Fund as well. Similarly, it's following the criteria that we've set out.
Thank you. And then
I mean, sorry, they're all bid led,
yeah.
But the judging of the bids, obviously there's a lot of criteria. They're all laid out in the bidding documents, which would be familiar to you.
Yeah. And with regards to the local industrial strategy, you're preparing London's local strategy to be published next year. And of course, the aim is to improve productivity of London. But how is it going to ensure that this strategy is for all Londoners, including those perhaps of low income and from different communities?
Yes, okay.
I mean, I think the sort of the strand of it that sort of touches on my area is probably best covered off by sort of the Mayor's call for action to the government about the things that we would like to see changed. A lot of it about devolution. There's a full devolution of the adult education budget, for example, would enable us to address the very points that the point that you raise about inclusivity and broadening access. Careers advice, we've talked about apprenticeships, full devolution of the apprenticeship levy in London, again, would be able to help us tackle that accessibility and widening participation, particularly for disadvantaged groups, women, BME, and also financially disadvantaged groups. Looking at emergent skills as well, advanced learner loans. We're making a push as well for about 16 to 18 skills as well. And that's not to take over sixth form funding, but certainly there needs to be a greater knitting together across the piece rather than starting at 19.
I'm going to stick with that because I think Susan's probably got some follow-ups on that a little later. But Rajesh, do you want to add anything about?
Yeah, no, I was just going to add to that is, I mean, London's got a huge inequality problem. Almost, I mean, if you sort of take into account the housing costs, about 28% of Londoners live in relative poverty, and that's why it's very important to reach out to those communities, whether it's in inner London but as well as outer London. And productivity problem is big, and that's why we've launched programs like this Mayor's Civic Innovation Challenge, where we are using the innovator and the entrepreneurial community of London to help us solve some of the biggest challenges faced by London, including sort of inequality.
Yeah.
And one thing I would want to say quickly, though, is well, it's hugely important that we establish what will replace the ESF funding, which obviously funds an awful lot of these programmes and the area that you've just touched on. And the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, actually knowing what it is, how much, preferably it being properly devolved to devolved areas like London rather than centrally controlled is hugely important.
Indeed, and on that same note, Rajesh, you mentioned the Mayor's Greater London Investment Fund. I think the pot is around 100 million at the moment, and 85 million of that comes from EU funding. So is that sustainable in the future?
Well, that's why we continue to make the case to the government, and I think we haven't had full sort of reassurance, and I think that's why the Shared Prosperity Fund, we don't know the details of at the moment, but I think it's very important for everyone to realize that how much some of the good work that we are actually doing are funded by the EU as well, and that the government must give us guarantee that some of this will be replaced and they'll keep, if not at least increase, but keep the levels that we have.
Yeah, because that's providing access, particularly to those innovative businesses you talked about that perhaps otherwise couldn't get it. I think, Chair, that my last question has been covered in the debate.
Thank you for that, just for brevity. And I'm just going to bring in Assembly Member Susan Hall, who wants to just ask something about industrial strategy. But I also want to now introduce Justine Simons, who is our third Deputy Mayor, who's now joined us this morning. And Justine is responsible for the area of creative and culture. So when we move into the next section of questions, we will be putting some of those questions to you as well. You're very welcome. Susan Hall.
Okay, thank you. Rajesh, going back to growth, do you think that much growth came from the decision by the LEP to spend £700,000 on 2 beach parties?
I don't recognise beach parties, but if you are meaning,
Well, one was called a beach party, one was a splash party. £700,000 of taxpayers' money. Do you think that?
Well, I don't recognise splash parties, but if you mean the community programme that was done in the Royal Docks, then I absolutely support that, because I think for far too long, whenever there is a regeneration program of that scale, if you do not include the communities in that regeneration program, they'll feel left out. They'll be left out. I think the communities have to be involved in any kind of regeneration program. And also one of the problems that we've faced in a lot of deprived areas, including east of London as well, is that the communities have left out. I mean, they haven't necessarily equally benefited from the development in that area. So we don't want it to become like a spaceship landed from another planet. We want it to, there has to be a buy-in from the local communities. They must feel part of it. And they've also got the right to enjoy the benefits of that regeneration.
Yeah, I think this is really crucial that we get away from, I mean, it's so kind of some ridiculous Daily Mail-esque, Sun-esque thing to take the title of something and say that this is public money being spent on a beach party, so it's like it's a one-off fun day or something. These things are about engagement programs. When someone undertakes sort of a comprehensive estate initiative to kind of rebuild an estate, you know, there's a whole series of engagement programs to bring local people into it, to get their input, to consult them, to actually excite imaginations, to bring children into the area, to know that what's being built there, they should think about seeing a future there. The Royal Docks and what's going on there is going to provide a huge amount of employment. But if people see it as just, I think whoever just said a spaceship, was it a spaceship, Rajesh, you said, like what happened at Canary Wharf, and the Tower Hamlets people saw that happen there and they were not brought into it. The things that are going on down in the Royal Docks, such as the ones that you named, are about engagement from the very young to older people, and I really think we should stop taking a silly title out of context and look at what it's actually trying to do.
Okay, and I'll tell you, Deputy Mayor, what makes me cross, and readers of the Daily Mail actually,
well, hang on a minute,
I'm answering back.
Well, I'm sorry, we're not having answering back. You're here to ask them questions.
I
Susan.
am, and when
You're not
I'm
here to make statements, I'm afraid.
Well, I'm afraid when somebody refers to readers of the Daily Mail as they're fed up with.
You're here to ask them questions.
I would say, well done, Daily Mail, because you're standing up for the taxpayers of this country.
But that's not a question either, and even if it was a question, it's not one that they can answer. They're answering your questions.
Okay,
you may put a question.
If you want to shut my questions down, that's fine.
No,
the last question in this was
I
about.
Want to stop your statements.
The last question in this was about Brexit. The Labour Party have now said that they will go to an early election. So I repeat my question. big finances are saying that a Corbyn government will be more damaging to London than Brexit. So will you now look into what you can do about that, since you'll spend your entire time worrying about businesses and Brexit?
Once again, I'm going to suggest that...
Shut me down
I'm sorry.
again.
Well, I'm sorry, but that's not really a question that's within the competence
But it's
of the...
obviously very
I'm sorry,
important.
they're not in a position to decide the outcome of the general election, decide whether or not we should hold one before the end of this year or in next year, as you well know. So I'm afraid I'm very happy for you to ask them any number of questions relating to their brief, and the subject this morning is about whether or not the Mayor is fulfilling his manifesto commitments. Now,
And the
I
answer was
have read the
no.
entire manifesto, and I do not remember there being a mayoral commitment anywhere in the manifesto that there should be a general election held before the end of the year. So unless you're actually going to come to the subjects that we have agreed in our pre-meeting that we would ask the deputy mayors about, I'm afraid I am going to rule
I'm sorry,
questions
Chair,
about other areas out of
I was
order.
merely responding to answers that we've been given
Well,
by
you're
the
not-
panel that continually refer to Brexit, and I'm now referring to the fact that if there's a Corbyn government, since people like Morgan Stanley are saying that is more dangerous than
I think that's
Brexit,
the third
I think we should
time.
be looking at
I think
it.
that's the third time I've now heard you mention Morgan Stanley. No, I'm sorry, I saw Assemblymember Joanne McCartney first, and then I saw Sean Bailey.
Just to say on the same vein, I restrained myself from asking what a right-wing Tory government would do to environmental standards and regulations and employment rights and so forth.
And
I
I'm
think
afraid
if I can restrain myself, I think my
I'd
fellow
like you
Assembly
to, can I
members
ask
should
you
do
please
as
to
well.
continue to restrain yourself, and I'm afraid I also asked Caroline Russell to restrain herself, and I stopped Rajesh answering her questions about climate emergency, although she managed to not put the words right-wing Tory government into her question, which I'm very grateful for. Assemblymember Sean Bailey, have you got a question for the panel?
I actually have a question for the panel
Great.
for Jules. So Jules, just to go back to what my colleague was saying about, and you characterise it as Daily Mail, sensationalisation.
Okay, that's a shorthand, I think.
Hold on. I'll just say I have been involved personally in many estate regenerations because I lived there.
Where's the question?
It's coming. Because I lived there, and I would just ask the question: the events as I understand them, I would ask you: do you think that is the best way to involve a community in its regeneration? Where? Because probably, I would argue, the best way is over the long term. You talk about a place that's been regenerated, the Real Docks. Surely the greatest way to integrate that community is for them to get some of that employment. Wouldn't the money been better spent on that?
Okay, we've just had an answer from Jules on that, and I'm sure he's going to pretty much say what he said before. We have still got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 questions outstanding in the next
Chair,
section, and I'm terribly sorry, but I am actually going to ask us to
I'm
move
happy
on.
not to add to your woes.
Sorry, Chair, can I just do one line? I'll
Yes,
repeat-
one line.
That one line, half of it is a repetition. It's about engagement, which is part
Yes.
and parcel about getting people into employment.
Deputy Mayor Jules Pipe, that was exactly what you said in your last answer, as I predicted.
We'll take that
We're going to come back
Apparently I didn't
to
say it again.
we're going to come back to Susan Hall, who's now going to ask some questions about economic fairness.
Right, okay, question, whoever wants to take it first. Recent research from the Institute of Fiscal Studies indicates that the proportion of working Londoners in poverty has risen to nearly a quarter, i.e. 24%. What is the Mayor doing to address this?
Again, this is the good work standard is exactly something which will address it, because getting paid well and fairly is the most important thing. I think people are working incredibly hard. In London, the employment rates are very high, but the only reason why, one of the main reasons why there is so much poverty, is also that they need to get paid fairly, and that's why the Mayor is championing London's living wage. Just in last 3 years, we have doubled the number of London living wage accredited employers. We have launched the Good Work Standard, and amongst the sort of 4 key pillars of the Good Work Standard, fair pay is one of them. But just having the right sort of workers' rights, flexible working, more diversity in workplace, and other things. So that is by and large the most important thing we can do.
And I'd say that from the skills side, that although often it's very easy, and I'm guilty of it as well, saying that the sort of skills for London is about ensuring people can get work. Actually, as much as that, it's about ensuring that people who are in work can improve their skills, new skills, and therefore climb the career ladder and improve their financial standing. So and address in work poverty. And that's the key reason why we made the decision with the AEB to change the funding criteria to fund up to a London living wage. So therefore directly enabling people who were deterred from taking in-work courses while employed and enabling that to happen.
Whilst acknowledging that the gig economy works for some people, what is the Mayor doing to help more disadvantaged Londoners to access secure employment without them having to resort to the gig economy?
So again, I mean, the employment numbers are high, and again, the sort of good work standards is something which is hugely important. Reaching out, so whether you are running your own small business, which a lot of Londoners do, I mean, almost 99.8% of businesses in London are small businesses. 50% of Londoners work in a small business. So we've got a range of support programs for small businesses. For people who want to start their own business, but also for people who are employment, it's very important that they get paid fairly, and that's why the Mayor continues to sort of champion London living wage, and we've launched the Good Work Standard.
What proportion of businesses do you think you actually get to?
What proportion of business? Again, like I said, we've recently launched it and we continue to champion it. And it's not just about proportion of business, but it's also proportion for a number of employees that are actually directly benefiting from it.
Yeah. So if you take the businesses, how many businesses are there in your view in London?
Well, I mean, Companies House will say it's about 1 million businesses are registered in London.
Okay, if there's 1 million businesses, just how many do you think you interact with?
Well, we interact fair few businesses through various different sort of mechanisms, whether it's London
numbers, percentages.
I mean, there are different sort of numbers for different things, but if you are
But take it on the whole, then, how many people do you think that you interact with in one way or another?
Well, I believe that I think it was the Assembly report last year, where I think it did say about 1/3 or a quarter of the businesses in London were aware of London Growth Hub and the support services it provides. So interacting also in the sort of digital, it's not just about face-to-face meeting, but also about digitally what kind of services. So for example, the Brexit Resource Hub that we launched, many businesses have benefited from it. For example, the London Growth Hub online version, many businesses benefited from it. From Business Growth Program.
Okay, I mean, you obviously asked the question because it's important for you to know. So when you ask your officers how many people are interacting, do they ever give you a specific number, or do you just think it's 25% of 1 million, you say?
No, I think this is the Assembly report I'm quoting. That figure comes from the Assembly report, which the Assembly did published it. But what I'm saying is that there are different channels of communication.
Yeah, no, I get that. Do you accept that the gig economy does work for a lot of people?
Well, I think it's important that we just talked about how 28% of Londoners live in poverty. And I think what is important is we don't go backwards in terms of workers' rights.
No, that's not the question, Rajesh. Do you accept that the gig economy really does suit some people?
That is what I'm trying to answer, that it's important to identify that when we talk about gig economy, it's not sort of result in exploitation of the workers, and we don't end up going backward in terms of workers' rights. It's very important.
Absolutely, but do you accept that it does suit some people?
Well, not that I know of.
Sorry?
Not the ones I've met.
Really?
Yeah. So there are incredible number. There are people.
Okay. Can we perhaps broaden this out? I mean, I think the gig economy, it's talking about pejorative terms. I mean, a lot of people do perhaps find working in, and I think I'd like to bring in Justine at this point, in the hospitality sector, working on, for example, 0 hours contracts. And I'd give one example, which is Wetherspoons, who absolutely, as a matter of course, recruit all of their staff on 0 hours contracts. Do you think it's true that the 0 hours contract is something that is fairly prevalent in, the nighttime economy? And is it something that we should be assisting people away from, or as Susan Hall is suggesting, that maybe it works for some people? So in certain circumstances, perhaps minicab drivers or in the hospitality sector, that there is a place for it?
I can't talk about minicab drivers. It's not my area.
No, I don't think that counts as cultural creative particularly.
I mean, in the creative industries, there are a lot of freelancers and a lot of SMEs. Yeah. That's the kind of character of the industry. The flexibility is good for a lot of people, but there are real challenges around working conditions, kind of short-term contracts, workers' rights. Pay in the sector is quite low by and large. The average salary of an artist, I think, is less than £10,000 a year. So the structure of the industry is quite difficult in terms of individual working conditions.
Does that help? It's broadened it out a bit.
I was just looking for a yes or no, really, from anybody. But obviously, it does suit some people. If they've got childcare, carers care, all sorts of things. I've spoken to many people, and it does suit them. Anyway, shall I go on to the next section?
Yes, let's move on.
Right, okay. What opportunities has the Mayor created for Londoners to receive the skills they need for a changing labour market? Who'd like that? Jules, I can see you looking at me.
Sorry, what?
What opportunities has the Mayor created for Londoners to receive the skills they need for a changing labour market?
Well, I don't want to kind of rehearse what I've said before, really. I mean, obviously, a large part of this is...
Have you got anything else to add? Because if not, Chair will go...
there's all the things that are happening under the umbrella of Skills for Londoners. As I said, whether it's the approach to AEB and the changes that we have, initial changes we've made, the changes that we have planned, the establishment of the Construction Academy, the Digital Talent Programme. What else?
I mean, we reach over 300,000 Londoners a year through the adult education budget alone, so the work through our colleges and other learning providers is all kind of focused on that.
But presumably if we're talking about, sorry to come in on your question, but if we're talking about the skills they need for a changing labour market, where Rajesh is talking about investment in tech invest, then presumably on the other side that we're encouraging people to learn the kind of tech skills that they might need to be able to work in the new companies that have been invested in, because there's no point London becoming a hub for tech and fintech or whatever if we haven't got people who've got the skills who can take up these roles in these new incubators companies.
Yeah, I mean, everything is turning digital, and that's why digital skills are hugely important. I think that's why the Mayor's Tech Talent Programme is incredibly useful. And it's about lifelong learning. It's not just sort of one-off. It's not just about young people. It's about people who are already in work and want to progress or want a career change, and that's why it's quite important. So the industry itself is changing. The way we do things is changing, and whether we talk about construction, the way sort of technology is being used now is being changing. If we talk about sort of creative industries, the way sort of creative work is being done is changing, huge use of technology. So digital skills is hugely important, and that's why a lot of efforts is going in that direction.
Yeah, so on this digital skills program, it's got about half a dozen different strands, whether it's working with young entrepreneurs, whether it's ensuring a strand ensures that sort of training courses, the curricula are actually fit for purpose. And working with digital educators as well to make sure that they have the skills to impart rather than teaching outdated technology and approaches, and high level digital skills training as well. So there's about half a dozen different strands which are trying to move the level of qualification on in London in digital skills.
And it feeds across into the creative and cultural side, doesn't it? Because we've had this massive growth in the number of films, for example, being made, and obviously digital is such an important component in films. So is there the stream of people coming through who are able to work in that industry?
We need more people, definitely.
So it's still a growth area?
Massively, yeah. We need 10,000 new workers in the film industry in the next 2 years. That's a prediction of the gap.
Okay, I mean, I would say it's not all about digital. I mean, the most important people we need are electricians and mechanics and builders and hairdressers and physical fitness people, etc., etc. And they're the people that you are desperate for when you really need something. And so we need to be looking at that.
I think I do agree with that, but you also mentioned future jobs, and that's why we talked about digital a bit more. Of course, we need all of those skills to it. That's why I think the opportunity lies with AEB. Yeah.
We mustn't ever forget that or move away from that or give any of those people any thought that they're not very, very valuable to us. I'm going to move on to the last bit, which is apprenticeships. So, Michelle, it is coming up to a year since the Mayor announced he was investing 1.3 million in pilot projects designed to help employers spend their apprenticeship levy funds. How has that progressed? Has there been any evaluation? And if you could keep it to a minimum, because I'm aware of the time.
In terms of evaluation, I think the short answer is no, because we've only really just started and got underway on the programmes that we're doing. We're about to launch the procurement of the final part of the apprenticeship programme, which I can't remember the exact figures, but we can send you that. That will be launching shortly, and we're asking for providers to come forward to put forward proposals for working with specific industry sectors that they feel would benefit from apprentices and working with those employers to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. We're now on to the final section, and I'd like to thank Deputy Mayors Rajesh Agrawal and Jules Pipe for their attendance, and they've both stayed with us a bit beyond their original time when they were due to depart. But we're coming on to the last section of questions, and many of those are now going to go to Justine and Michelle, well, in fact, all of them. So thank you very much for being with us this morning. Justine, we allowed the other two Deputy Mayors about 5 minutes to make a statement. Obviously, we're now in the flow of the meeting, so I think that would sort of probably break the train. But we did then start with a question to them, and I hope that will give you the opportunity to set out what's been happening in the last 3.5 years, which is how closely do you think that the Mayor's current strategies and programmes resemble the manifesto commitments that he made around culture and the creative industries?
Sure, thank you. Well, we had 11 manifesto commitments and they were all on track, is the short answer. I mean, I didn't prepare a big statement, but I thought what I might do, I know what you're saying about breaking the train, but I thought I might just give you a little overview of the creative economy, just to give you the kind of headline so you can frame it. I thought that might be useful.
I think so, because have you been to the Economy Committee before, but certainly not in the last year,
Not for a while, no.
No,
I just
not
thought it'd
for a
be
while.
good to give you a bit of a kind of overview.
Yes, that would be great.
So, giving you an overview, the creative industries in London, it generates 52 billion every year. One in every 6 jobs in London is a creative one. In terms of the employment, those jobs, they're growing 4 times faster than average, so big growth area on the jobs front. In terms of productivity, creative workers are 22% more productive than the average worker. Another interesting thing about automation, because that's obviously one of the big kind of trends that we're all thinking of in terms of workforce. 87% of creative jobs are categorised as low risk of automation. So, you know, we can think of these jobs as jobs of the future, you know, future-proof jobs. In terms of tourism and business, 4 out of 5 visitors say culture is the reason they come here, and cultural tourists generate 7.3 billion a year. The other interesting thing, I think, is that the creative industries are a significant driver for business in other sectors. Susan mentioned carpenters, I think, and hairdressers. We've just actually, in the last few weeks, done a piece of research on the supply chain connected to the creative economy. So this is the first time we've really started to understand what are the kind of wider business impacts of the creative economy. So what that threw up was that you've got 52 billion is the value to the London economy every year, and another 40 billion a year is generated by the creative economy in the supply chain. So that means carpenters for film sets, accountants for designers, all of those kind of additional supply chain jobs. And every job in London's creative industries supports an additional 3/4 of a job in the wider economy. So that's a kind of new, interesting thing we've started to kind of track, and we published that new report a few weeks ago. I think the thing I'd say is that we can't rest on our laurels, though. You know, even though this is a really good story, there are some kind of quite significant challenges. The Mayor's Creative Economy Investment Programme is quite tactical. It addresses kind of tactical support across these industries. Every year, the Creative Economy Programme investment is 2.8 million from the Mayor. This delivers the work on film, design, fashion and games. Last year, the return on investment was really significant. So in terms of the return for our 2.8 million in film, fashion, design and games, this generated 736 million back to London in new sales, exports, inward investment into the creative industries. And I can talk more about all of those detailed programmes later, I'm sure you want to. Setting this in context, this is parcel of, you know, the most ambitious programme we've had at City Hall for Culture. More widely, the big kind of other programmes that sit alongside this are the London Boroughs of Culture, Waltham Forest, Brent, East Bank, the new Culture and Education Quarter in the Olympic Park, the 6 new creative enterprise zones which also support the creative economy. Through our work in our Culture at Risk office, we've supported over 500 venues and creative spaces. And in terms of the public engagement, in terms of collectively all of our work, we've supported over 11 million visits to cultural events and activities. So that's part of the strategy to widen access to culture for all of Londoners. That's a few highlights. In terms of the challenges we've got...
Well, shall we pick up the challenges when we ask the questions? Because I think a number of the questions relate to the challenges for the sector, if you don't mind.
Go for it,
And at this point, I'm now going to bring in my colleague, Assembly Member Dr. Onka Sahota, who's going to start with skills and employment-related challenges.
Great. Thank you, Chair. As the word challenges was mentioned, we'll start with the challenges. What specific skills-related challenges have been encountered with regards to boosting London's creative industries, and what is in place to address them, please?
Specific challenges around skills?
Yes.
We need more trained people. That's it, really. You know, we've got a really growing economy, and the biggest challenge is that creative subjects at schools have been deprioritised. So if you think about the kind of talent pipeline, schools play a big part in the story. Careers advice isn't really up to scratch. And, you know, I mentioned earlier, you know, in the film industry alone, we need 10,000 more skilled people in the next 2 years alone. So we're in this kind of situation where we've got majorly talented people in London and the jobs, and we need to bring those two things together.
And is there anything that the Mayor can do to address those challenges, given that we have this skills shortage you allude to?
I mean, do you want to talk about
so there are a number of things we are doing to invest in this area. So we are investing around £2 million into an ESF sector skills programme focused on these sectors, which we're currently starting to work on. There's been other things that have happened, the creative enterprise zones, for example, fashion district, Thames Estuary production corridor activities, apprenticeships again that I mentioned earlier, the apprenticeship programme that we're working on. One of the key focuses, one of the key sectors is creative industries, and we're doing some work on that. And so there's a range of activities that we're looking at, as well as through the adult education budget, which is obviously the mainstream funding. What more can we do to support that? The Mayor recently launched his call to action around further skills devolution at City Lit, which is obviously a fantastic institution of adult learning that has a particular focus on the creative industries and has a hugely successful alumni, and obviously a significant amount of funding going into that from the Mayor.
Great, thank you. Are there any barriers for people, say from disadvantaged backgrounds, who seek to enter the creative industries? And what can we do to address those barriers?
Yeah, there are. I mean, part of the challenge is the structure of the industry. So I mentioned earlier that it's mainly kind of freelancers, SMEs.
Mm-hmm.
The way in which traditionally jobs have been kind of awarded has been through networks.
Mm-hmm.
So it's who you know, right? So that's one of the biggest challenges. And you know, it is a bit easier to crack those things if the industry is big institutions, but it's really not. It's kind of small enterprises and individuals. So they don't have big HR departments. Do you know what I mean? So structurally, that creates a bit of a barrier, and the kind of modus operandi has been, you know, it's who you know. That's how you kind of find people to put your project together, and then the project finishes, and then you go again.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the biggest challenges.
But can we do anything about it to make the challenge? Can we be acting, hosting events rather, or opening up to employers to these issues rather? How can we help them? We know what the problem is, but what can we do about it?
I mean, I would say that all of the projects we're doing really have that idea built into them. So,
Yes.
you know, if you take the creative enterprise zones, for example, so, you know, creative enterprise zones are deliberately about skills as well as they're about space. So they're about affordable space, which is one of the things we know we really need. But what they're not about is just kind of like landing some creative businesses in an area. They're partnered with ESF skills funding, so that when those jobs start to become available and those zones and those businesses develop, you've already got young people in those areas who are skilled up and ready and connected into those areas. So you're kind of at every point opening up the doors in all of the programs to kind of allow people in to make those connections, to work with the kind of grain of how the industry operates.
Great. Okay. And what have been the drivers for developing the London's screen industries? What have been the drivers for developing the London Screen Industries plan? And when can we expect to see the plan?
Sorry, you mean, sorry, say that again to me. The Screen Industries Skills Plan.
The briefing says that there is the London Screen Industries plan.
The work we do in film is through our agency, Film London. And so their job is to promote London as a filmmaking capital,
Yes.
to bring in inward investment. In terms of their work, what they bought for our investment in them, they bring in 250 million of new investment in film, TV, animation every year.
Yes.
They do things like every year they run the production finance market, which is bringing together people who've got movies with people who want to invest in movies, and every year that delivers around 4 million in new business for the capital. And then tactically we're working with them on, exactly to your point, kind of opening up the doors for people who are not represented in that industry. So one of the things we've co-funded with them is called the Equal Access Network, which has got big employers involved in it, HBO, ITV, Channel 4, and that's all about kind of representation, workforce diversity. 60% of people on that programme are from BAME backgrounds, and in year one it's delivered 180 jobs, so it's quite a kind of tactical programme.
Mm-hmm.
There is a national skills strategy, I think, for film, and Film London are kind of engaged in that, working with the BFI and others. But what we know is we just need more skilled people, you know. And again, I'll make the point again that schools play a really important role. It's really an issue that creative subjects have been deprioritised. I think there's a kind of perception in schools that it's not a real job. And, you know, quite clearly, it is a real job. Millions of people work in it. It generates millions. It's a growth area. So, you know, we've got a kind of advocacy job to do around what's happening in schools, I think, because it's obviously outside of our remit, but it affects the whole kind of talent pipeline.
And how has the Mayor worked in partnership with the industry to deliver the skills, infrastructure and the growth for the culture and the creative industries? How has the Mayor helped to push this agenda along?
Do you want to do that?
So I think we've mentioned earlier, Rajesh chairs our Skills for Londoners business partnership. One of them, we have at least 2 members of that business partnership. So it's basically a board made up of business people who advise us and the Mayor around how we should invest in skills provision or what more we can be doing in that sector. We have 2 members specifically that come from creative industries background. We have Noreen, who's from Film London, and we have another member that I've completely forgotten at the moment, but we can send you the membership list. And part of their role is to talk to us, advise us on perhaps our investments, on the work we're doing, how we can engage more people, and we are working through that board.
Great. And the other thing is, of course, London Partners have been a lot talked about, but how are London Partners helping to push London as a cultural centre around the world? And particularly, how are we showing that all culture isn't just in inner London, but it's also in outer boroughs? How are we doing that? And what's London Partners doing about that also?
Yeah, well, the London Partners guys left.
I know, but you're still the Deputy Minister for Culture.
Yeah, I mean, 4 out of 5 people come to London because of culture and the creative industries, and that's not just tourists, that's people who come to locate for business, or they kind of come to live here. So it's a big factor in why people come to London. In terms of promoting the kind of breadth of offer, London and Partners work on the whole of London. Obviously, we've got the kind of major institutions mainly in the centre of town, but the programmes we're working collaboratively with them on are things like the London Borough of Culture, which is all about showcasing culture in the outer London boroughs. Been phenomenally successful this year in terms of audiences, in terms of schools engagement, in terms of new people coming to the borough, not knowing what was on offer in the borough culturally. So that's been really successful. And then, of course, moving forward, we're starting to kind of strategise with London and Partners about East Bank, which is, major new cultural quarter, biggest new cultural district in London since Exhibition Road in 1851. Of course, it's not built yet, so they can't be promoting something that isn't yet available. But that strategic thinking is really starting to develop now, so that we are ready when East Bank opens. And we're predicting that it will bring in, I think, 1.5 million visitors a year to East Bank. So that will be a big, important part. And of course, that will help Newham, Waltham Forest, Hackney, Tower Hamlets, all of the East London boroughs.
Great, okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Onka. And I think for our final group of questions, we're now going to move on to Assembly Member Caroline Russell, who's going to start with some questions about the nighttime economy, and then we're going to go on to the London Borough of Culture. And something tells me that Assembly Member Susan Hall might want to ask something about the Borough of Culture.
Okay, great.
Caroline.
Thank you very much, Chair. First question is, what has been the impact on London's economy from the Mayor's appointment of a night czar?
I mean, in terms of the economic value of the nighttime economy, we know that 1.6 million people are employed in it. We know it's worth 26 billion and it's growing fast. And in terms of the data, how we're kind of measuring what's happening, one of the recommendations from the Nighttime Commission was that we set up a data observatory, because in the past we've never really measured what's going on in the nighttime economy, and this is the first time we've started to do this. And what we want to do is continue to do it so that we can measure results as we go along. We are at the beginning of this process. The research is very fresh. The data observatory is in development, and I think over time that will give us a kind of, we'll be able to track changes as we go along through the years on the nighttime economy. But this is, we're really at the beginning of this process of understanding the value of it, the nature of the workforce, the conditions, all of that stuff. We're really starting to understand in more detail.
But do you see this new data about nighttime workers potentially helping to make sure people have better working conditions?
Definitely, yeah, definitely. One of the things that we discovered in the data was that 53% of jobs in the nighttime pay less than the London living wage, right? So we've got kind of quite disproportionate challenges, I think, sometimes in the nighttime economy. And now we know that, we can start to thread that through our policy, right? So in the one of the things we're doing is piloting a nighttime enterprise zone with Waltham Forest. And as part of that, we'll be looking at working conditions, we'll be looking at pay, we'll be looking at the Good Work Standard and how that can kind of flow through the pilot work that's happening in Waltham Forest.
Great. And is there a timescale for that work when you expect to have some data that you can start
So Waltham Forest, we awarded it very recently as a pilot. The kinds of things that will happen, just to give you a flavour of it, they're looking quite holistically around high streets, around working conditions, promoting work in the evening. So they're doing a Shop Local Late campaign, they're doing Reclaim Your High Street events, they're offering low-cost business space, guidance for late-night businesses. And what they're going to do is evaluate the programme and share that programme. And one of the other things that we have is a group of brilliant people called the Nighttime Borough Champions. So that's a champion in every single borough that they all get together and share thinking and ideas. And so everyone's going to be looking at this pilot in Waltham Forest and seeing what can be learnt from it. And working conditions, living wage, London Living Wage and the Good Work Standard is all part and parcel of that pilot. So, yeah, we'll get the results, I think, in the spring.
Great. Are you doing, one of the things that a former member of this committee, Assembly Member Dismore, was very concerned about was the impact on neighbours of nighttime economy activity, whether it's noise or people leaving events late and things like that. And I think we did have some discussion previously about developing good practice guidance on how residents can engage meaningfully and constructively with councils and businesses operating in the nighttime economy. Has that work developed at all, and is that part of the Waltham Forest work?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we're kind of capturing good practice and disseminating it. I mean, it's all really about creating a balance, isn't it? And I think one of the great things about the Nighttime Borough Champions is that several are now producing nighttime strategies, and because it's quite a kind of open debate and sharing of best practice and ideas, everyone's kind of growing together. And of course, those nighttime strategies are all about that. They're all about creating that balance between kind of nighttime, daytime, residents, people who want to go out at night. That's the sweet spot, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know. But I think the important thing is there's almost a kind of collective movement across London now. I think the other thing we're doing is working in a cross-policy way across City Hall, which hasn't happened before. So there's a 24-hour delivery group, and that's got people from regeneration, from the business team, transport, health, culture, everyone coming together around that to look at how, you know, intelligence about the nighttime can be threaded into all of the different policy areas. There's a Safer Sounds partnership, and that's about the music industry and the police and the boroughs. So again, a kind of quite a practical form where, you know, to avoid the situation that we've previously had where things come to a head, they explode, the police are involved, venues get shut down. The Safer Sounds partnership is about everyone working collectively to resolve problems as they begin to arise before they kind of, you know, happen on the streets, and then it becomes much more of a crisis. So that's proving kind of very productive working between music industry, police and the boroughs.
Great, that's good. Very useful to hear. What about the kind of nighttime sort of cultural infrastructure? So the rehearsal spaces, the kind of, and particularly the more marginal venues. And so I was talking to people from the Guardians of the Arches last night and the East End Trades Guild, and there was someone who represented a group of musicians who use a railway arch as a rehearsal space, but they're really struggling and really worried about rent reviews and rent rises. Is there anything that the Mayor is able to do to protect that kind of cultural infrastructure for creative businesses?
Yeah, definitely.
And what is it?
Yes, I mean, you know, it is a real issue. It's been a real issue for a long time in London. We've been tracking it here at City Hall for many years. And, you know, if you take, you know, for example, music venues, you know, there's been a decline for the last 10 years. But we are seeing much more stabilisation now. And in terms of the things that we're doing here, we've got a kind of suite of initiatives really to tackle this issue, because I mean it's the same in all big cities, you know, kind of rapid growth, increase in land value, things just get really expensive, business rates. There's lots of reasons why it becomes really, really hard for small venues and small businesses in the nighttime economy and in the creative industry more widely to survive. So I describe it as a kind of suite of initiatives, quite tactical initiatives, almost like acupuncture. You know, it's where can we at City Hall, where can we best deploy our energy and time and networks and resources to get the best outcome for lots of these vulnerable spaces. So there's a suite of things. I'm going to talk you through them. First of all, London Plan. So in the draft London Plan for the first time, all of these spaces are mentioned and protected: artist workspaces, pubs, grassroots music venues. That's the first time that's ever happened. So it's a recognition that these spaces are vulnerable, and protections within the London Plan. Yeah. The other thing that's in the London Plan is the new agent of change, which for people who don't know what that is, it used to be the situation that, if, for example, if you moved into a residential space, a new residential space next to a nightclub, you could then get that nightclub shut down, even if that nightclub was successful and been there 20 years. Equally, it works the other way around. But the agent of change is really about saying whoever comes in last, has to create the kind of mitigation. So if you are, we saw this with the Ministry of Sound, if you are a new development coming into an area that is predominantly known for the nighttime economy, you have to build into your development proper soundproofing, etc., right? Equally, if you are a venue moving into a residential area, less likely, but if you are, the responsibility is absolutely on you for your soundproofing, for your queue management, all of those things. It's a fairer system, the agent of change. And it's now in the London Plan, and actually, fantastically, it's been adopted nationally. So there's a kind of set of things around the planning system. The other thing we're doing is we've written the first ever cultural infrastructure plan, which is, I encourage everyone to look at it. It's the first time we've mapped all our data, and it's an open source data on the GLA's website, tell you where workspaces are, music venues, etc. And that's better intelligence, really, because if you're a local authority, how do you know what's in your area? You tend to mostly know about the things that are public-facing, but you might not know about a studio that's behind closed doors. This is much better data that will give local authorities, licensing authorities, planners, developers, much better intelligence so they can make better decisions, and we're more cognizant of where things are and where things need to be protected. Mm-hmm. Then you've got creative enterprise zones. Again, that's all about protecting creative businesses, creative workspaces, zoning, affordable workspace is part of that, planning protections, decent business rate reductions. So that's the third part of the suite. And then finally, the Creative Land Trust. So that deals with the financing issue. So that's really about faster financing for creative spaces at risk.
And has the Creative Land Trust, has that actually, is that running any projects at the moment? Is it?
So that is, we've established that now as a charity, it's a registered charity. That takes about a year to do that in the current kind of timeline. We've appointed board, we're appointing the chair now. That's got it's got I think about £9 or £10 million as a kind of initial fund. And the next stage is to kind of build on that. There's a pipeline of spaces that are kind of lined up for support, and the next stage is to go out for social investment to kind of, off the back of the initial investment from the Mayor, the Arts Council, Bloomberg Philanthropies, to go and kind of bolster that and build a proper fund. Mm-hmm. And the target for the Creative Land Trust is hoping to secure 1,000 workspaces in the next 5 years. That's their target. So it's ambitious, yeah.
1,000 in the next 5 years. That's, I'm sure this committee will come back and check on how that's going in 5 years' time, and maybe in the interim. Just moving on to look at Borough of Culture. Yeah. Since the Mayor launched the London Borough of Culture Awards in 2017, what has been the financial and cultural impact for the winning boroughs?
Starting with the cultural impact, I think there's been over 1,000 events in Waltham Forest. They've broken their target about schools engagement. 94% of schools in the borough have got involved in Waltham Forest. In terms of the economic impact, so what they've been doing is kind of tactically looking at evaluating some of the main events. So they've looked, obviously 1,000 events, it's hard to evaluate every single one in terms of its economic impact. So they've been sensible and said, we'll look at 10 events and we'll test what was the additional economic value. And so in the 10 events they've tested, it's generated a further 4.1 million spend from audiences. So the stats are good, yeah. And of course, you know, lots in terms of cultural impact, you know, big flagship events, lots of work in outdoor spaces, really making the most of the assets of Waltham Forest, lots of audiences, new audiences coming, and also quite deep work as well. I don't know if you saw the Imagine programme on the BBC about East Side Story. If you didn't, I really recommend you do it. It's fantastic. And that was 22 young people who all excluded. They came through youth offending, pupil referral teams, kicked out of school. Fantastic project where they kind of created their own story, their own theatre show. There was a 100% retention rate in that programme, which is kind of unheard of. 2 of the young people are back at school. 1 actually avoided a prison sentence because the team worked with the judge and concluded that this was such a constructive thing to get that young person back into a positive place. He avoided prison. And 2 have joined the youth advisory group, and they were all receiving coaching until 2020. But I think it just shows you how the London Borough of Culture can just be quite a sophisticated model. It can deal with economic growth, it can deal with schools engagement, and it can tackle some really kind of deep-rooted social issues in the borough, you know, which is everything we wanted from it. So really happy with how it's been going.
Fantastic. Thank you. What is the Mayor doing to ensure that more Londoners and tourists know about the London Borough of Culture Awards? And what engagement has your team had with London and Partners, or if any, on that?
Yeah, London and Partners have been very positive about it, very supportive. They've been using their assets and their campaigns to push it out, and also lots of work locally. I haven't got the stats actually to hand about the number of visitors that aren't Waltham Forest residents, but we can get those for you because it's...
if you could send those afterwards,
sure.
we'd be really grateful. That would be really, really helpful.
Yeah, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I know it was really impressive. It's done those 2 things. It's really kind of made people in Waltham Forest go to events, feel proud of their borough, but it's brought in new people who, you know, just didn't know what was happening, didn't know Waltham, the William Morris Museum existed, you know, all of those things that Waltham Forest got to offer. So it's been good. Yeah.
And what about volunteering? Because volunteering was a massive thing in the
2012
City of Culture things, and also yes, I mean there've been some very big sort of cultural events where people have been volunteering. But I'm just wondering about volunteering in relation to the boroughs. With the Borough of Culture, is that one of the ways that Waltham Forest, for instance, is engaging residents in the Borough of Culture scheme, and is that having some of those? You know, it's another of the ways that this stuff can have those wider social benefits.
Yeah, definitely. I'll check this for you, but I think it's almost 1,000 volunteers, something like 900 volunteers or something, local people who've volunteered to get involved in the Borough of Culture, but I can check that statistic.
It would be really helpful. And if you could broaden that out to maybe include some of the other boroughs where they've had not the full Borough of Culture award. I'm aware, because Merton was one of those boroughs, and that's one of my boroughs that I represent, that there's been a lot of people who've been quite excited and quite involved in a number of aspects of their smaller award.
Yeah, just to finish on the volunteers then in Waltham Forest. One of the brilliant things is that the volunteers will actually be at the centre of the legacy for the Borough of Culture. So the borough have committed to continuing the volunteers programme, because it was always imagined as something that would wrap around the actual year. But people have loved it so much, and the borough has been so kind of impressed that they've decided to kind of continue funding it as a legacy programme, which is fantastic.
Caroline, I've got a couple of people who wanted to come in. Assembly Member Susan Hall wanted to ask something about Borough of Culture, and also Assembly Member Sean Bailey had a question for you earlier on, but I think you'd literally only just sat down at that point. So I'm going to take Susan Hall first because it's on the Borough of Culture.
Okay,
issue.
well actually it's on the Night Tsar, but I
On
didn't
the Night Tsar
interfere
as
at that as well. What major concrete achievements actually has the Night Tsar shown since her role was formed?
Very good. In terms of the achievements of the Night Tsar, she has established the first women's safety charter.
Sorry?
The first women's night safety charter.
Oh, that was a while back, wasn't it?
Which has, well, that's what you asked me, right?
Yeah,
Takes me a
no,
while.
I'm just getting
Women's Safety
timelines.
Charter, and so far 250 organisations have signed up to that. She is overseeing the first nighttime enterprise zone pilot in Waltham Forest, which I mentioned earlier. She has initiated the late night transport working group with TfL. She has established and chairs the Nighttime Borough Champions Group. Every borough is involved in that. Many are now producing their own nighttime strategies as a result. She has undertaken a lot of casework. We've heard from the panel about the challenges in the nighttime economy for small venues. Working with our Culture at Risk office, we have supported holistically over 500 venues and spaces, but specifically 226 of them have been nighttime venues, so a lot of casework she's undertaken to support them. She has undertaken 16 night surgeries. She is developing
16 or
16 night surgeries.
16?
16. She is developing the data observatory I mentioned earlier, which is pooling all the data on the nighttime economy for all of us to use. She has initiated the 24-hour delivery group, which I mentioned earlier, which is the cross-policy working group around the 24-hour economy, bringing together regeneration, business, transport and health. She has convened and chairs the Safer Sound Partnership, which I also mentioned brings together the music industry, the police and the boroughs to address issues in the nighttime economy and the music industry before they spill out. So, a comprehensive work programme via Night Tsar.
Are minutes of these meetings available?
Which meetings? All of them.
You said she'd convened. Well, we hear about this sometimes, and it turns out that there's been one meeting of something, and then that's it. The nighttime surgeries, the last time she was in front of this panel, she couldn't remember where she'd been to, which wasn't very impressive. So if we could know where the 16 nighttime surgeries were, that would be helpful. If we could also know if there are minutes to the meetings of the things that she's supposed to have convened, that would be interesting. And the Women's Safety Charter, 250, what is the aim? How many are we aiming to get, or is this yet another thing that has got no measurable?
Okay, I'll take those in order. In terms of the 16 surgeries, the boroughs, I'll give you a list of some of the ones she's been to. She's been to Wandsworth, Lewisham, Redbridge, Westminster, Brent, Havering, Wimbledon, Southwark, Waltham Forest, Hackney, Croydon and Kingston-upon-Thames. But I absolutely can send you the full
She's
list.
also been to Wandsworth. She went to Battersea and...
Yeah, Wandsworth.
She said Wandsworth.
Wandsworth, Lewisham, Redbridge, Westminster, Brent, Havering, Wimbledon, Southwark, Waltham Forest, Hackney, Croydon and Kingston.
Okay, if you could put that in writing. I mean, she did say at one point that she'd go everywhere and she'd be everywhere. Well, 16 night surgeries doesn't cover all our boroughs by any means, and she's been in post now quite some time. So if you could forward on to us minutes of those meetings, and we can look back at all the things that she's said to have been to. And again, the final question was the Women's Safety Charter, 250 people. How many is she aiming to get? What are the measurables on that?
Yeah, I don't know about a target actually. I can find out. But I mean, have you seen the Women's Safety Charter?
I've heard about it.
Yeah, perhaps what I'll do is circulate the women's.
send that.
I can send that round. Yeah, because it gives you just a flavour of the kinds of things that those
the measurables,
organisations
though.
do.
We can all write good things down on paper, but how are we going to measure whether this is a success or not? That's what we're really here to do. So be very grateful for that.
Absolutely.
Okay, moving on then to the Borough of Culture, which our chairman knows I will be asking. Do you think and I refer back to a comment from Deputy Mayor Pipe, that Daily Mail readers would think that so much money spent on bicycle ballet would be good use of taxpayers' money. I'm sure you've got that there, because I bring it up because I'm quite perturbed that taxpayers' money is spent on bicycle ballet.
Yes. So what I would say is that Bicycle Ballet are a performing arts company, and what they're committed to is promoting cycling, and they're committed to opening up access to Londoners and people who don't generally go to see culture inside buildings like theatres. They produce a kind of lovely outdoor show, and it's very participatory, so it involves lots of members of the public, and it's a kind of creative project that opens up access to audiences that wouldn't ordinarily go to traditional art centres.
But some of the figures involved in some of these arty shows are excessive, and they are taxpayers' money.
I mean, the contract with Bicycle Ballet wasn't a GLA contract. They were contracted by Waltham Forest. I think it was a £30,000 contract.
Yes, £30,000.
Yeah.
You see, I think that's a lot of money.
I mean, what I'd say is we don't know how that money was spent, and we don't know, how many people were involved. What we know is in the outdoor sector, these are individuals who are very committed, and we know that they're not, the wages are very kind of modest. And this is a long-term programme. It reached a lot of people. It's all about access, really.
I accept that, but to most people, and one's reading the Daily Mail, as has been thrown at me, most people, that's one heck of a lot of money. This is taxpayers' money at the end of the day. And one has to ask if it's good value when we've got crime and God knows what going on that we need to address. Which brings me to my next question, because obviously you'll defend the bicycle ballet, which you and I will have to agree to disagree on that one. The Mayor actually said that, and I'll quote, because we were questioning the £11 million more on culture, he said that cultural spending reduces crime. Okay, so how, I mean, it was in relation to that 11 million extra. How much has culture reduced crime, do you think?
I think what we know is that, in thinking about tackling crime, we have to be holistic, right? We have to tackle the causes of crime and crime itself. And what is absolutely clear is that young people involved in arts and creative activities do better at school, lead healthier lives, and it often offers a kind of more positive life path for young people. We know, as I've spoken about earlier, there's lots of jobs for young people in the creative industries. And, if you think about things like the Young Londoners programme, there's lots of projects within that have really successfully kind of worked with young people at risk of crime, whether that's theatre projects, photography projects.
Does that come out the culture budget?
The East Side Story I mentioned earlier. Yeah, so there's lots of examples where we're using culture as a way to engage with young people and offer them different life path alternatives. Lots of evidence to suggest that's a really successful thing.
Sorry, can I just clarify then? Do you actually have figures for the number of people who've perhaps been convicted of crimes or who've been on probation or who've had some sort of community order, who've then become involved via one of the programmes and then gone away from being involved in criminal activity? Do you actually have figures for that?
Those figures don't exist. That is a kind of quite an expensive data project to launch. But what we do know, I gave the example of East Side Story, 22 young people, all of them at risk, all of them outside the system, pupil referrals, at risk of going to prison, 100% retention rate, 2 back at school, 1 avoided jail, really back in the system, phenomenally successful using culture as an intervention. And
so
you
some
can see that.
Good examples, but probably at a slightly younger age group then, making sure that they are continuing their involvement in education.
Yeah, and I mean, we've got other programmes which are part of the London Borough of Culture, like the Agency Project, fantastic project. It's all focused on young people from disadvantaged backgrounds, giving them the support to develop their own businesses and to support them to be entrepreneurs in their own right. So, they've started like boxing clubs which divert young people away from crime. One of the projects is a 10-week life skills project, which deals with things like how to deal with conflict, how to budget properly, how to deal with trauma. You know, all these things are important. And, you know, what we know is that, you know, culture has a unique ability to open this stuff up for young people. Often where, you know, the more formal system, the police, you know, the kind of criminal justice system isn't equipped to do that. It's got its job to do. Whereas we're in the business of, you know, kind of backing young people, you know, giving them opportunities, giving them different life paths, and it's, you know, it's a fantastic thing.
Anything else?
That was my last question. So,
And Assembly Member Sean Bailey, did you want to come in now?
Justine, I just want to go back to, you made a comment earlier on at the size of the sort of cultural business in London, and it just strikes me that, and you also made a comment as well, that it's hard, the way in which it's structured means that if you come from a particular community, your opportunity to get involved in this is pretty low, which is really unfortunate because it's growing and it could be a real employment opportunity. Is there any, this is as much as a plea as a question, is there anything we can do about that? Because I grew up in a borough that was full of culture, but nobody from my experience had anything to do with it. It sort of drifted by. So what can we do to get people's hands on that work and be in that world?
Yeah, totally right. I mean, I think, what can we do? I think the point, to reiterate the point I made earlier, schools. You know, I think we've got to get creative education back on the map. You know, it's been deprioritised, and we're seeing a real kind of drop off. And you know, if schools is a really important place when you learn about culture and creativity, and where, you know, your interest in it can be really sparked as a serious career. So that's a big part of it. We're not in charge of education here at City Hall, but I think we can be advocates, and we are advocates, and I think all of us have a duty to kind of campaign for the reinstatement of a creative education. The other things that we're doing is trying to kind of embed into our programmes. So the point I made about the Creative Enterprise Zone, so that's one of our signature initiatives. It's one of the places where we do have some leverage, and very deliberately that's about studio spaces and business support, but it's also about skills in that local area. So, you know, what we want is young people growing up in the areas where the zones are established, you know, to be involved, to get involved, to know where those skills, those training programs are, to kind of open up the industry. So you're kind of taking the barriers down, so the doors are there, you can happen upon it. It's not something that is in a kind of glass building in the centre of London and you don't know what that is. You know, you're kind of opening up the doors on your doorstep.
Okay, and this probably already happens, but what work are we doing to get the big cultural institutions like, you know, I wandered into the portrait gallery and just thought, I've lived in London my whole life, I've been here once.
Yeah.
What are we doing to get those people out into communities? I now live out in Romford.
Yeah.
I doubt that anybody who lives around me has any relationship with that. How are we getting those organisations who often receive a lot of public funding to come out to us as opposed to us have to go in there? Are we encouraging that?
Yeah, we are. I mean, one of the vehicles actually is London Borough of Culture. So a lot of arts organisations in central London, like National Portrait Gallery, National Theatre, etc., Royal Court, what we've been able to do is use London Borough of Culture as the kind of platform, because also for the institutions, they're like, where do we start, right? So using London Borough of Culture as the kind of vehicle to get those cultural institutions to work in local boroughs, to get out of the centre of town. So that's, you know, they're the kind of things we're doing to kind of use our own programmes to leverage that kind of openness from the big institutions. But you're right. I mean, you know, these institutions, if you look at the workforce in cultural institutions, if you look at the audiences, if you look at the programming, you know, the fact of the matter is that our creative and cultural institutions don't reflect and represent the demography of London, you know.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think that was a useful addition to the questions. However, our final question, we're going to come back to Assembly Member Caroline Russell, who's going to put the final point to you, and then we're going to wrap up the meeting.
Thank you, Chair. So my final question is about how the UK's withdrawal from the European Union would impact on London's creative industries. And possibly at the same time, you could answer what the Mayor is doing to mitigate any potential impact.
And the Corbyn government.
I think that
I think we'll stick with Caroline's question.
I have very clearly talked about we understand there is a possibility that we may leave the European Union at some point.
I hope so.
And we need to understand what the impact of that might be on London's creative industries.
We'll have a party.
Bicycle ballet.
Really good question. I mean, if you look at the creative economy and impact of Brexit, you know, what we know is a third of the creative workforce is international. And, you know, I was just thinking this morning, actually, if you think about, you know, the head of the British Museum, the head of the Royal Academy, the head of the National Gallery, they're all EU nationals, right? So, you know, the kind of flow of talent between the EU and London is really vital. So that's one of the areas of real worry for us about the kind of flow of talent and expertise. I mean, if you look at those jobs I just described, you know, they are kind of full-time, permanent, you know, kind of big jobs. But if you look within the creative economy, as I mentioned, it's this very freelance workforce. And when you start to look at kind of freelancers and short-term contracts for things like models getting to London Fashion Week or opera singers, you know, kind of being called in when someone's got a problem with their voice at the last minute, all of these things create kind of real concerns for us because we're absolutely reliant on talent from the European Union to support our burgeoning creative economy. So that's one side of it. And then the other part of it is, of course, the kind of market side of it, the trade side of it. European Union is the creative industry's biggest market. Over 40% of our trade in the creative economy is with the EU. So yeah, I would say, you know, some serious concerns, and you know, more vital than ever that we continue with the Mayor's support for the creative economy in London, and we maintain these tactical initiatives, and we push through as best we can.
Thank you very much. I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Justine and Michelle, for staying here until the end of this section of the meeting. I'd like to thank both our guests who are still here and also our previous guests for all of their contribution. And the committee, I'd like to ask you if you're happy to note the discussion, and can we delegate authority to me as chair in conjunction with the party group leads to agree any appropriate outputs from this meeting.
Noted.
Yeah, good. I'd like to the next item on the agenda is the Economy Committee work programme at pages 77 to 78. I'd like you to note progress up until now, and we've got some topics agreed for meetings for November, December and January, which has all been agreed by the Oversight Committee. Is that all agreed?
Noted.
And finally, the date of the next meeting, which is going to be on high streets, on the subject of high streets and how to keep them going and how to make them work, on the 19th of November at 10 a.m. in this very place in the chamber. And I do not consider that there are any other items of urgency, and I declare this meeting closed. Thank you.